The Hittites and the Old Testament. By Frederick Fyvie Bruce. Chapter 2. 2. The Rediscovery of the Hittites. The first explicit information about the Hittites outside the biblical narrative was that derived in the 19th century from the Egyptian monuments, from which it was learned that the pharaohs of the New Kingdom who extended their dominion into Syria came into conflict there with a people whose name was represented by the consonants KHT-.2 in particular. The story of the valor of Ramesses II as he led his army against the Hittite king at the Battle of Kadesh on the Orontes, 1297 BC, was found to be described in graphic language in the poem of Pentor, which was engraved on the walls of various temples, and to be portrayed in sculptured relief on the walls of others. The Egyptian text of the treaty which Ramesses made with one of that Hittite king's successors was also discovered, inscribed on the walls of the temple of Karnak and of the Ramesseum. Then the Assyrian records, too, were found to make frequent references at a later date to several kingdoms of people called the Kadi, who lived in various parts of Syria, kingdoms which successively fell before the onslaught of the Assyrian kings in the 9th and 8th centuries BCE. Further light was thrown upon the Hittites by the discovery in 1887 of the Tel El Amarna tablets, which included a letter to the Egyptian king Akhenaten from the Hittite king Suppilulius to congratulate him on his accession to the throne, 1377 BC. Various sculptured stones and hieroglyphic inscriptions in Syria and Asia Minor were ascribed to the Hittites by W. Wright, A.H. Sayce, and other scholars. 3. Because they were found in the territory where the Hittites were known to have lived, but the many attempts to decipher the hieroglyphs have until recently proved unsuccessful. 4. In the last decade of the 19th century, fragments of cuneiform tablets were discovered at the village of Bogezkoy in east-central Asia Minor, written in an unknown language which Per Skeel, who published them, took to be the language of the Hittites, rightly, as it turned out. In 1906-7 the German archaeologist Hugo Winkler uncovered at Bogezkoy a record office of the Hittite Empire, containing the royal archives, amounting to some 10,000 clay tablets. For Bogezkoy, village of the pass, marks the site of Katusis, which was for about 4 centuries, circa 1600 to 1200 BC, the capital city of the Hittite Empire. There was little difficulty in reading these tablets, for their script was cuneiform, but to understand them was another matter, for most of the languages 8 and number 5 represented in the archives were unknown. 2 languages represented, however, were known: the Sumerian and Akkadian, and the records in these tongues left no doubt as to what the tablets really were, but some years passed before the meaning of the others could be made out. The honor of establishing the character of the chief language of the 8 belongs to Professor Bedřich Hrozný, of Prague, who was then on the staff of Vienna University. He found a solution while he was studying the tablets in Istanbul in 1915 for the Deutsche Orientgesellschaft. 6. The English reader will find an account of the discovery in the article Hittites, contributed by Professor Hrozný to the 14th edition of the Encyclopaedia Britannica. 1929, it was proved that this language, the official language of the Hittite Empire, was Indo-European, that it belonged to the great family of languages which embraces the Indic, Iranian, Tocharian, Franco-Phrygian, Greek, Illyrian, Italic, Celtic, Germanic, Baltic, and Slavonic linguistic groups. 7. Another interesting fact which emerged was that this Hittite language was identical with a language hitherto called Arzawan, known from 2 letters in the Tel El Amarna collection, one of which was a letter from Amenhotep III of Egypt to Tarkan-Taraba, king of the land of Arzawa, in Cilicia. As early as 1902 the Norwegian scholar J. Knutsen, the editor of the Tel El Amarna tablets, had pronounced the language of the 2 Arzawa letters to be Indo-European 8, but such opposition was offered to his view that he withdrew it. Now that the nature of the principal Hittite language was discovered, a number of scholars of various nations gave their attention to the reading and interpretation of the Bogezkoy archives, with the result that the history of the Hittite Empire, previously known in fragmentary fashion from the records of Egypt and Assyria, was now learned at first hand. 2. In this paper the guttural spirant in Egyptian, Akkadian, and Hittite words is, for general convenience, transliterated kh. 3. See accounts by Wright, The Empire of the Hittites, 1884, Sayce, The Hittites, 1888, 4th edition 1925, E. Cowley, The Hittites, 1920, D. G. Hogarth, Kings of the Hittites, 1926. For the leading worker on Hittite hieroglyphs is Professor Ignace J. Gelb of Chicago University. See his Hittite Hieroglyphs 1-3, 1932-35-42, Hittite Hieroglyphic Monuments, 1939. 5. These 8 languages are Sumerian, Akkadian, Hittite, Proto-Hittite, Luwian, Palaic, Hurrian, and Aryan. 6. He announced his discovery in Die Lösung der Hethitischen Problems in Mittelungen der Deutschen Orientgesellschaft, No. 56, 1915, and in Die Sprache der Hethiter, 1916-17. 7. On the Hittite language Ch. Sturtevant, Comparative Grammar of the Hittite Language, 1933, Hittite Glossary, 2nd edition, 1936, and Supplement to Hittite Glossary, 1937, and E.H. Sturtevant and G. Bechtel, Hittite Chrestomathy. 1935, Sturtevant holds that Hittite is not in the ordinary sense an Indo-European language, but that Hittite and Proto-Indo-European are both descended from a common parent stock which he calls Indo-Hittite. This view is accepted by several scholars, but is quite unnecessary. Hittite was radically affected by the influence of other languages. Its Indo-European character is evident from its morphology rather than its vocabulary. Many words from native Anatolian languages have found their way into it. If its phonology and morphology are simpler than those of other early Indo-European languages, this is not because it was a language in the making, but one whose synthetic structure had already begun to break down under the impact of other languages. Cf. Old English under the impact of Norman French, Bulgarian under the impact of invaders speaking a Turco-Tataric language, Persian under the impact of Arabic. 8. J. Knudsen, Die zwei Arzauerbrief, Die Altessener Kunden in Indo-Germanischer Sprache, 1902.